Jack is one of the homeschool kids who grew up in Pan, and now he studies dentistry in Scotland. I love to talk with him about homeschooling.
A lot of the things that I learned then have stuck with me. And I think a big reason for that is because it was a lot of experiential learning. So a lot of learning in interesting ways. And I think when you learn in interesting ways, you can remember things better because sort of the knowledge ties in with the memories. And if the memories are fun, then you remember the fun memories because it was a good time, so you remember the knowledge. How many hours a day? I think my homeschooling journey it changed a lot. So it was never like one set way of doing things, but it changed. I think for maths and English, there was sort of a curriculum that we would follow. But, you know, if there was something else that we were meant to be doing, we would put a pause on that and come back to it. And we were able to I think when I went to school, I sort of realized a lot of time spent in school is spent like wasting time because you're distracted by friends and you're in a classroom setting, which is like not a nice place to socialize, but you're also not fully able to learn because you sort of have these conflicting things of this social side as well as this learning side, and it doesn't blend well together, in my opinion. Yeah, I think homeschooling, it does definitely facilitate a lot of self-taught, and I think particularly when I was in school and I went into the pandemic, I sort of saw that my homeschooled past where I was able to learn by myself and sort of be shown the way to do something and then just let to do it. So it allowed to sort of go and explore something on my own. It was a big advantage in school. And yeah, it was sort of a way of learning through your own interest and not through a set curriculum. But somehow it always seemed to work out and you seemed to cover everything because your interests would just take you to the right places. It's a much more natural way of learning. I think overall no, but at the start it was a little bit difficult because it's like whenever you're in any new environment, it's not like going from homeschooling to school, it's like going from anywhere to anywhere. It's different. So you have to take some time to adapt. And I think when I went to school, it's hard to remember, but in the first couple of weeks, I think maybe learning, because it was a different kind of learning that I wasn't used to, I did take maybe a couple of weeks. It was so different from any way I'd learned before, because I think in homeschooling, I had experienced different forms of learning. Like I'd learned how to work with bamboo when I went to Jandai, and I learned how to farm when I was here, and then I also did maths and English, and I did online, and I did coding and things online, and I did breakdancing, and there was just a lot of different ways of learning. And then I went to school, and again, this was like a readjustment period. But after I got over that period, I actually found that it was pretty easy. Like I could figure it out. I think the thing I struggle with the most is probably the strictness of it, of school, yeah. And I think that I think the first thing, I always really wanted to go to school because I hadn't experienced high school, so I was very keen to get involved and sort of have the high school life. But after a couple of months, you kind of realize that high school life it's not better for socializing really, because when I lived at Pampan, I was sort of able to socialize with many different kinds of people. And I went to high school and it was just people my own age and just people who had very similar minds, I think, which it wasn't a bad thing. They were all very interesting, but they had very similar minds because they'd been brought up in the exact same way with the exact same curriculum. And I think for that reason, sometimes some of them were amazing. Like, so I made incredible friends who were just the most creative people I knew. But overall, I think school sort of nurtured an environment where you weren't able to think differently and creatively. And I think that homeschooling, if I hadn't had homeschooling, I may have ended up like that. But luckily, I did, so I didn't. I think the question you have to ask yourself there is how much of that 5 to 6 hours a day are they actually learning? Because you can spend a lot of time studying and never learn anything if you don't study the right way. And I think with homeschooling, when you learn, you remember and you retain. So it's like, for me, as I remember, as I think about it, I think it's a more effective way of learning, in my opinion. For me, I think that's how it is. I don't know if that would be the same opinion shared by everybody. But in my experience, when I learned through homeschooling, because the things were sort of interconnected with my memories, like I remember I have a fantastic teacher when I was homeschooled called Mandy, and she taught me about ecology. And to teach us about ecology, she got us to learn a sort of basic curriculum around ecology and practical application within a real life setting like a forest. And then she told us to teach it to a group of people who she was teaching a course to. And through that, I think you learn to consolidate your knowledge. And it's like, sometimes during the course, like we wouldn't know the answers, so the course participants would ask us a question, but then we'd have to think about it first and then realize we didn't know, and then we'd ask Mandy, and then that would sort of make our knowledge better because it was combined in a sort of social situation and in a very real life setting. I don't think I need that kind of discipline. I think discipline is important because without at least, I think the way that school presents discipline is quite scary sometimes. Like, discipline isn't about dressing the same way. There's no point in dressing the same way. I don't think dressing the same way every day or dressing the same way in a school uniform is going to make you smarter. I don't think you learn anything from dressing the same way. In fact, you probably learn less, because if you have to dress differently each day, then you learn how to dress yourself. And you learn how to dress more, dress to express yourself in some ways. So I think dressing the same way is not the solution to education. But discipline is important. And I think, for me, I think I learned to have to be disciplined, because in school, everything is given to you on a plate. It's like they say, okay, here, now you can learn this. You don't have to think about it. You just do drills, right? But when you're homeschooled, especially when I got older, I had to do a lot of, I'd been taught how to learn things on my own, but it took my own willpower to then implement those things and to make myself do those things so that I could continue my education. So I think, homeschooling teaches you discipline, but just not the kind of how to dress the same way every single day. From my own personal experience, the answer is simple. It's no. I didn't have any problem socializing. My problem was sometimes I get bored of seeing the sort of similar kinds of people every day, because when I was homeschooled, especially in the environment I was homeschooled in, I was able to meet so many different kinds of people. But I think it's true that, like, people in school, they can have problems socializing as well. It's not like everyone who goes to school is perfect at socializing, and it's not like everyone who's homeschooled is going to be perfect at socializing. But I think that it comes down to a question of how you're homeschooled. So if you're homeschooled in a way that from an early age sort of exposes you, like me, to different kinds of people and makes you have to form connection with these people, then you won't have any of these problems. And that's the same for kids in school. So if kids in school are given the opportunity to interact with people, they're going to be good at socializing. So it's just about making a curriculum in homeschooling which allows for your child to socialize, and then they'll be good at socializing. And sometimes you might have to give them a little helping hand. Like, I remember my mum would have to make me go to things because I was sort of just wanted to read my book. And I'm very glad she made me go to those things. I didn't always enjoy them. Sometimes she'd make me go to things, I'd have an awful time. But by doing that, she taught me to socialize and to make connections very slowly and gradually. It's like chipping away at a rock. But I think I was always quite introverted as a child, so that was something that my mum had to implement. But if you're already an extroverted kid, you're not going to need to worry about that at all. Different people. Yeah, I just remember my childhood, and it's the thing, I remember the memories, and then when I think about the memories, I can remember all the wonderful things I learned. I would love to be a kid again, yeah. And to answer your first question, it definitely did, because I think when you apply for dentistry, it's, in the UK at least, it's such a competitive program. So there's so many different applicants. And yeah, when you apply and the people from the universities are sort of going through the different candidates, when you're homeschooled and you're homeschooled in the way that I was, which was so unique, and you were homeschooled in, you know, this is in Scotland that I applied for dentistry. So when you were homeschooled in Thailand, on a farm, and you have all these unique experiences, you know, like I had friends in school who, they had incredible experience as well, but the things that they could talk about were very similar to the things that other people could talk about. Whereas me, like, none of the things I talked about were anything like what other people could talk about. So when I was homeschooled, my mum used to work at a clinic that treated refugees on the Thai-Burma border, and yeah, like no one else could write about that. And it was sort of my opening line in my personal statement, which is the first thing that you send to the university. And then if you get that, then you get the interview. And I think from that, like a person could have read it, and they give out so many interviews and just been like, okay, we'll take him because he says something different. He is something different. And I think, you know, dentists are biologists as well. And in biology, there's this thing about having many varieties. And this is something I learned from homeschooling, actually. I think you mentioned it, okay? So you, being Jandai, talked about how maybe in Yasso, basically having so many different kinds of seeds means that if the weather is dry, then you have a seed for the dry weather. If you have rain, then you have a seed for the rainy weather. And you have all these different weathers that the rice can deal with, right? So I think this term applies to sort of a lot of things in the world. You need diversity, because if you don't have diversity and the environment changes, which is very common in today's age, like to give an example, in dentistry, the global pandemic affected everyone. And some people were able to deal, some dentists were able to deal with it better than other dentists. So this is like the seed. The environment changes and you need different kinds of people in order to deal with that. So I think when they saw my personal statement, especially because I applied during COVID, they recognized I was a different kind of applicant. And I think the dental world, all professions, I think, benefit from having different kinds of people in them. There's no perfect dentist. There is just different kinds of people that you need for different situations. Well, that's a very big question. I think much smarter people have tried to think about that. I would say I haven't thought about it enough, but I can only know some principles that you would need to go by. And the first one is being that people are diverse and people are different. So children need to learn in different ways, and it needs to be recognized that children aren't all the same. They don't all fit into the same uniform. They have different ways of approaching the world. It's yeah, like it needs to be recognized that some children are fish and some children are monkeys. And if you ask a monkey to climb a tree, they can climb the tree. But if you ask a fish to climb the tree, it won't look pretty. So you need to recognize that you can't challenge everyone in the same way, and you can't make everyone learn the same way, because I think a problem in school that I noticed is if someone was different or someone learned in a different way. Like I had a good friend who had a lot of energy all the time, right? So he struggled to sort of sit still in class. And I think that meant that the teachers would get very annoyed with him, and then that would negatively impact his education. And I think it's important for teachers and people to recognize that people learn in different ways, so you need to be able to have an education system that caters to people's differences. So I think the first principle is having different ways of learning. The second, which kind of falls into it, is learning through experience. So I think one of the most wonderful things about homeschooling for me, on reflection, because I didn't always think this, it was after I went to school that I realized this, is that when you learn through experience, you will remember those things more, because they're tied to memories. They're not tied to, you know, writing the same thing in a book over and over again, or sitting a test that you forget all the knowledge afterwards. I remember doing that in school, so I would sit tests, learn all this knowledge, write it all out, can't remember a thing. But then if I think back to 3-4 years ago, and I think back to the time that Joe taught me how to do grafting on guava trees, I can remember how to do that. So So I think it's like they need to find better ways of teaching people that they can relate to memories and experiences more. And that's just my personal opinion. I think maybe not all people learn best this way. But for me, having experiential learning is something I would want to see more of in the education curriculum. The bad side of homeschool is the perception of homeschool, I think. So it's one bad side. So you need to, people need to know more about homeschooling before they have their own opinion of it. I think, and homeschooling is so interesting because it's never the same experience for everybody. Like, I'm sure if you ask Tan, Nada, any of the children at the farm, they'll have a different experience of it. Or if you ask a kid who's been homeschooled in the city, or a kid who's been homeschooled in a different country, a kid who's been homeschooled by one parent or two parents, it's always a very different experience. So the first, is understanding, is the perception of homeschool. And I think understanding what it's really all about, you kind of need to do it. It's very hard to just listen to someone talk, like I'm doing right now, and sort of understand what homeschooling is. You need to do it. You need to live it. I sometimes feel that when I was younger, I wish I had been given the opportunity. Not that I wasn't given the opportunity, like my parents did very well, but like it was more easily accessible for me to sort of hang out with more kids my age and to play sports, like do team sports. Because I feel that that's something that maybe my parents missed out on when I was younger. I got to do plenty of other cool things, but when I went to school, I felt I would have liked to play more sports. I'm still pretty good at sports, but like just playing in a team environment is something I would have liked. You know, some kids played football. I was like in a team. I sort of built houses in a team, but I still would have liked to play football. Homeschooling it's not one thing. It's many different. It's a big, broad term to encompass many different ways of learning. So you need to, if you're going to find problems with it, then you need to know what kind of homeschooling you're looking at. For me, it was just that sports thing. And that was it. Pretty much the only thing I can think of. It was completely different, but homeschooling easily gave me the ability to learn in different ways, and that meant that when I went and did homeschooling, it was like, this is just another way of learning. It's definitely not my favorite way of learning, and I think you can talk to a lot of kids in school and they will also say it's not my favorite way of learning, is learning in school. I certainly know that a lot of my friends shared that opinion, that like learning solely for exams isn't really learning. It's like memorizing something, using it, forgetting it. But yeah, very different, but very easy to go between. I think as a homeschooling kid, you build resilience, and resilience is a life skill, so it's something that's very important to learn, and it makes it so when you go to school, you're pretty good at school, because you can deal with things sometimes better than the kids who have been in school their whole lives, because you have sort of a different perspective on these things, and you know that life is full of challenges, and that that being homeschooled gave me that sort of strength and resilience to deal with school. Well, I say yes. That's yes, not because I just want to homeschool my kids, but because I think it's better for them. So if I find a school or I find a way of educating which I think is better for my kids and will allow them to not only learn but to have fun, then I might choose something that's not homeschooling. But until that day comes, homeschooling is, I believe in it.